I have been living in this world for 67 years now, and life has taught me the most important thing. People are rarely what they seem at first glance. Morning greets me, as always, 30 minutes before dawn. Old habits die hard, and although I haven't needed to get up this early for a long time, I continue to do so. My home in Greenbelt is a small one-story cottage with a porch and a garden where Elsa once grew roses. Nothing fancy, just a comfortable place to live that we chose 30 years ago, when I was just starting out in the restaurant business. Now, looking in the mirror at my wrinkled face with gray eyebrows and almost white hair, I remember my father's words. Barton, never let money speak for you. Let your actions speak for themselves. My father was a truck driver who spent his entire life transporting goods across the East Coast, returning home with the smell of the road and fatigue in his eyes. But he never complained, even when we were barely making ends meet. We lived in a small house on the outskirts of Rockville, and my mother supplemented our income by sewing for neighbors. My childhood was filled with the sound of a sewing machine, the smell of cheap coffee, and my father's stories about the open road. Even then, I was determined that one day I would create something of my own, somewhere where people could gather and feel at home. I graduated from high school without much distinction, but with a tenacity that my father called the real Hutch backbone. College wasn't for someone like me. Instead of economics lectures, I got life lessons working as a kitchen assistant at Jim's Diner. Jim Kowalski, a burly Polish immigrant with golden hands and a heart of gold, showed me that food wasn't just a way to fill your stomach, but an art and a language you could use to communicate with people. By the time I was 25, I was head chef at a small restaurant in Annapolis. And by 30, I was the manager. I saved every penny for my dream. Elsa, my wife, supported me in everything. We met when she came to apply for a job as a waitress. Short, with freckles on her nose and a laugh that sounded like bells, she captivated me at first sight. Bart, you take life too seriously, she often said, making me smile even in the most difficult times. We got married a year after we met, and 2 years later, Noel was born. We named him that because he was born in December, 3 days before Christmas, and Elsa thought it was a special sign. I still remember his little hands clinging to my finger and his eyes as blue as Elsa's. Back then, I thought he would inherit both her kindness and my determination. But fate had other plans. At 35, I finally opened my first restaurant, a tiny place with 5 tables called the Old Maple. Why maple? In the backyard of our first real home, there was a huge maple tree where Elsa and I often sat in the evenings, dreaming of the future. That maple tree was a symbol of stability, strength, and beauty and simplicity for us. For the first 3 years, I worked 18 hours a day, coming home only to sleep for a few hours and then leave again. Elsa took care of Noé, sometimes bringing him to the restaurant so he could spend time with me. I showed him how the dishes were prepared and told him about the suppliers and customers, hoping that one day he would stand next to me at the stove. But he was bored. Instead of admiration, I saw only impatience and a desire to leave in his eyes. He's still young, Bart. Give him time, Elsa reassured me, and I believed that time would put everything in its place. Gradually, the Old Maple began to turn a profit. We moved to a bigger house and were able to send Noel to a good private school. I thought I was giving him the best future, but maybe I made a mistake. While other children spent their vacations helping their parents in family shops or on farms, my son relaxed at summer camps and resorts. Maybe I protected him too much from hard work, which I myself never shied away from. By the age of 45, I already had 3 Old Maple restaurants in different parts of the state, and the business was thriving. People came from far and wide to try my signature dishes, duck with cherry sauce and my mother's apple pie. Critics wrote positive reviews, and I even received several awards from the local restaurant association. But the real reward for me was always the smiles of the guests and the knowledge that I had created a place where people felt special. Noel was finishing high school at the time. A tall, handsome guy with a charming smile and an easygoing personality, he was popular with his peers. He was an average student who didn't put in much effort, but he always knew how to get by. Unlike me, everything came easily to him. Girls, friends, grades that I would have worked hard for. When it came time to choose a college, I suggested he study hotel management or culinary arts. Dad, are you serious? Do I look like someone who wants to spend his life in a kitchen? His words hit me harder than he could have imagined. I heard contempt in his voice for the career I had dedicated my life to. It's not just a kitchen, Noel. It's a business that has given you everything you have. I tried to speak calmly, but I could feel the resentment boiling inside me. Yes, and I appreciate that. But I have other plans, so he chose marketing and communications, which, according to him, opened more doors. Elsa, as always, tried to smooth things over. Bart, let him go his own way. The main thing is that he's happy. And I gave in, as I always did when it came to Noel. Maybe I was too soft on him. Maybe I should have made him work in a restaurant during the summer to learn the value of a dollar. But I wanted a better life for him than I had. And in the end, I gave him a life without direction. After college, Noel changed jobs several times, never staying anywhere for long. He worked in advertising agencies, PR companies, and even tried to start his own event planning business, which quickly went under. I offered him a job in the family business, but he always found reasons to refuse. I have my own path, Dad, he would say, and I saw in his eyes the same stubbornness I once saw in my father's. By the age of 55, I owned a chain of 5 Old Maple restaurants, each of which brought in a steady income. I could have expanded further, opened new locations, but I decided to focus on quality rather than quantity. Elsa and I could finally travel, see the world we had only read about in magazines. But fate had other plans. At 57, I lost Elsa. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late. 6 months of struggle that aged me 10 years. I watched her fade away day by day and couldn't do anything. Noel flew in from Chicago, where he was working at the time, for the weekends, but I was mostly alone with her illness. Don't blame him, Bart, Elsa whispered on one of her last days. He just doesn't know how to deal with difficulties. He doesn't know how because we didn't teach him. After her death, I threw myself into my work. The restaurant became my salvation, a place where every corner reminded me of her, of our dreams and plans together. I updated the menu, adding dishes that Elsa especially loved, expanded the wine list, and made the interior even cozier. Now the Old Maple wasn't just a restaurant. It was a monument to our love. Noel returned to Greenbelt a year after his mother's death. His latest business venture had failed, and he needed money. I didn't ask how much he needed. I just wrote him a check. He promised to pay me back, but we both knew that wouldn't happen. At the same time, he introduced me to Verity Prescott, his new girlfriend. She was tall and slender, with perfect raven hair and manicured nails that never seemed to get dirty, even when she was cooking. However, as I later learned, she preferred restaurants to home cooking. Our first meeting took place at my house. I prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just a simple home-cooked meal. Beef stew with vegetables, a recipe my mother used to make, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Mr. Hutch, what a cozy home you have, Verity said, looking around my living room with obvious disappointment. I saw her gaze linger on the worn leather armchair where Elsa loved to sit, on the old photographs in simple frames, on the bookshelves filled not with collectible editions, but with well-read detective stories and historical novels. Thank you, Verity. My wife and I always valued comfort over ostentatious luxury, I replied, noticing how she grimaced slightly at the word ostentatious. At dinner, she barely touched her food, saying she was on a diet. Noel was unusually quiet, as if afraid to say the wrong thing in front of her. What do you do, Mr. Hutch? Verity asked, dabbing her lips neatly with a napkin. I'm in the restaurant business, I replied simply. Oh, really? What kind? Waiter? Chef? Her voice clearly betrayed her superiority. A little bit of everything, I smiled without going into details. The habit of not flaunting my achievements was in my blood. And you? I'm a corporate image consultant. I help companies look better in the eyes of their customers and partners, she said as if she were introducing herself to an important client rather than a future father-in-law. Noel looked at her with the adoration that only men who are madly in love can muster. I saw in his eyes the same expression that had once been in mine when I looked at Elsa. But unlike Elsa, who always tried to raise people to her level, Verity seemed to want to emphasize the distance between herself and others. 3 months later, they were married. The wedding was lavish, with 200 guests, most of whom I had never met before. Verity's parents, Hugh and Winifred Prescott, were just like their daughter, prim, with perfect manners and condescending smiles. Hugh owned a real estate company and Winifred was involved in charity work and served on several community boards. "Barton, I hear you work in a restaurant," Hugh asked during the reception, holding an $80 glass of champagne. "Yes, that's right." I didn't bother to elaborate. Over the years, I had grown accustomed to this reaction and saw no point in disabusing people, especially those who judged a person by the thickness of their wallet. "A respectable job," he nodded with the air of someone who had never done a day's work in his life. "Noel said you've been in the business for a long time." "All my life," I smiled and walked away, feeling his appraising gaze on me. After the wedding, Noel and Verity bought a house in the prestigious Greenbelt neighborhood, a two-story mansion with a swimming pool and landscape grounds. I never asked where they got the money for such a purchase, but I suspected that Verity's parents had helped out or that they had taken out another loan. Our meetings became rare and strained. Every time I came to their house for dinner, I felt out of place in this realm of modern design and refined elegance. Verity always found a way to point out my simplicity, whether it was a comment about my clothes, "Oh, Barton, you're always so practical in your choice of wardrobe," or my habits, "You still don't use a smartphone? How cute and old-fashioned." Noel never stood up for me. What's more, I saw him gradually start to adopt his wife's mannerisms, her views, and even her intonations. My son, who once could talk to me for hours about baseball or old movies, now discussed stocks, investments, and real estate. He started working for his father-in-law's company, quickly climbing the corporate ladder thanks to his family connections. I didn't interfere in their lives, although sometimes my heart ached at the thought that Elsa wouldn't recognize our boy in this well-groomed young man with a designer briefcase and a constantly ringing phone. Meanwhile, the Old Maple continued to thrive. I opened a sixth restaurant in Baltimore, and it quickly became popular with locals and tourists alike. I rarely mentioned my successes in conversations with Noel and Verity, not out of secrecy, but because they never asked. To them, I was just an aging father who was somehow connected to a restaurant, perhaps a manager or a chef, nothing more. Sometimes I wondered if Noel knew the true scale of my business. After all, he had grown up watching me work and seeing the restaurants develop. But maybe he just didn't think it mattered, or was embarrassed by his father's modest business in the face of the real successes in the Prescott world. One evening, while looking through papers in my office above the main restaurant of the Old Maple in Greenbelt, I came across an old photograph. It was of Elsa and me standing on the porch of our first restaurant on opening day. She was holding a bouquet of wildflowers. I had my arm around her shoulders, and we were both smiling as if the world were at our feet. "I miss you, Elle," I whispered, running my finger over her smiling face. "You would have known what to do with Noel. You always did." That night I made a decision I had been putting off for too long. It was time to talk to my son about the future of the Old Maple. I wasn't getting any younger, and although the managers at my restaurants were reliable people, I wanted the business I had dedicated my life to stay in the family. Maybe Noel didn't want to work in the kitchen or interact with customers, but he could handle the financial side, marketing, brand development, the things that really interested him. With these thoughts in mind, I fell asleep, imagining how our next meeting might unfold. I didn't know then that fate had a completely different scenario in store, and that a phrase uttered by my daughter-in-law over dinner would change our relationship forever. Verity Prescott Hutch. Even her name sounds like something out of an advertising brochure, polished, flawless, and completely fake. Our first meeting took place on that damp October evening when Noel brought her to meet me. I had seen many women he had brought home before, but Verity was different from all of them. There was something predatory about her, a kind of calculation hidden behind her perfect smile in designer clothes. "Dad, this is Verity." Noel introduced her with an expression on his face as if he had brought home a movie star. She held out her hand with long, perfectly manicured nails. Her handshake was light, as if she was afraid of getting my hands dirty. Hands that had worked in the kitchen for 40 years, cutting vegetables, kneading dough, tenderizing meat. "Very nice to meet you, Mr. Hutch. Noel has told me so much about you." Her voice was melodious, but with a slight note of condescension that was impossible to miss. "The feeling is mutual, Verity. I hope not everything Noel told you was true," and I joked, trying to lighten the mood. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, only good things, I assure you." That first evening, I prepared my signature roast, the dish most often ordered at my restaurants. It was a simple but hearty meal, prepared with love and attention to detail. Verity barely touched her plate. "Aren't you hungry?" I asked, noticing how she was carefully pushing her plate away. "Oh, no, not at all. I'm just on a diet. Nothing personal, Mr. Hutch. Your food just looks homey, homey, as if it were something shameful, something to be avoided." I saw Noel shift uncomfortably in his chair, clearly unsure which side to take. "I understand. Next time, let me know your preferences and I'll make something more suitable," I said, swallowing the sarcasm that was rising to my lips. After dinner, we moved into the living room. Verity looked around the room with poorly concealed amazement, as if she couldn't believe that people actually lived in such conditions. "You have a very authentic home, Mr. Hutch," she said, lingering on the old armchair that I refused to replace because Elsa loved to sit in it. "Thank you. It served me well for many years." "How long have you lived here?" "Noel mentioned that you work in a restaurant?" 30 years, and yes, I've been in the restaurant business my whole life." "How interesting," she said without the slightest interest in her voice. "And what exactly do you do? Are you a chef? A waiter?" I glanced at Noel. He was clearly nervous, tapping his fingers on his knee, a habit he'd had since childhood when he felt uncomfortable. "I do a little bit of everything," I replied evasively, not wanting to go into details. Not because I was ashamed of my work, but because I felt that Verity wouldn't appreciate what I'd built from scratch. "Dad's a great cook," Noel interjected, trying to change the subject. "His roast is the best in the world." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Verity smiled her perfect smile. "But you know, these days home cooking is becoming less popular. People prefer modern restaurants with innovative cuisine, molecular gastronomy, fusion, all that stuff." "Maybe," I smiled in response. "But I've always believed that real food doesn't need any gimmicks. The most important thing is quality ingredients and a love for what you do." "How sweet," she said in a tone that made me feel like a naive child who didn't understand the realities of life. The evening continued in the same vein. Verity talked easily about her job as a corporate image consultant, her trips to Europe, and the celebrities she had met. Noel looked at her with admiration, occasionally interjecting comments to show that he too belonged to this glamorous world. When they left, Verity held out her hand to me again, but this time her handshake was even lighter, almost imperceptible. "It was very informative, Mr. Hutch. Thank you for dinner." The door closed behind them, and I was left alone in my authentic home, feeling a sense of unease growing inside me. Something about this woman alarmed me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way she looked at Noel, not with love, but with satisfaction, as if he were just another acquisition in her collection. 3 months after that meeting, Noel announced that he and Verity were engaged. I tried to look happy, but inside I felt cold. Elsa would have known what to say in a situation like that. She always found the right words. I just patted my son on the shoulder and said, "If you're happy, I'm happy for you." The wedding was lavish and expensive. Verity's parents, Hugh and Winifred Prescott, spared no expense. The ceremony took place in a historic mansion that they had rented especially for the occasion. 200 guests, an orchestra, champagne that cost more than my first car. I felt out of place among all these people in designer suits and dresses. "Here comes the father of the groom," exclaimed Hugh Prescott, approaching me with a glass in his hand. Tall, with perfectly coiffed gray hair and a smile that seemed to be the result of hours of practice in front of a mirror, he put his hand on my shoulder with the familiarity of a man accustomed to owning everything he touches. "Barton, right? Pleased to finally meet you in person. Verity has told me so much about you." I doubted that Verity had even remembered me after our meeting, but I nodded politely. "Likewise, Mr. Prescott." "Call me Hugh, we're family now." He laughed, revealing perfectly white teeth. "Noel said you work in the restaurant business? That must be tough these days." "Yes, but I'm not complaining." Of course, of course. A job is a job, right? The main thing is that it's satisfying." He spoke to me in the tone of a wealthy patron talking to a poor relative who had been lucky enough to find himself at this celebration of life. Winifred Prescott, a petite woman with carefully coiffed raven hair, now I understood where Verity got it from, and a string of pearls around her neck that probably cost as much as my car, joined us. Barton, dear, how wonderful to finally meet you. You must be so proud of Noel. Such a wonderful young man. Yes, he's always been special, I replied, thinking how little these people knew my son. To them, he was just a good catch for their daughter, another trophy in the Prescott collection. After the wedding, Noel and Verity moved into a large house in the prestigious Greenbelt neighborhood. I attended their housewarming party, another pompous event with champagne, canapes, and people I had never seen before. The house was huge with high ceilings, marble floors, and a minimalist design that Verity described as the last word in contemporary aesthetics. "What do you think, Barton?" she asked, showing me around the house like a museum curator displaying exhibits. "Impressive," I replied honestly. "But isn't it a bit too big for the two of you?" "Oh, we plan to have children, of course, but not right away. I want to focus on my career first. You know, it's a time when women can have it all, a family and a successful career." I nodded, thinking about how Elsa had juggled caring for Noel with working at our first restaurant. She didn't talk about career and success. She just did what she thought was right, without fanfare or self-admiration. 2 years have passed since then. 2 years of Noel gradually distancing himself from me and everything related to his past life. He started working for Hugh Prescott's company, marketing luxury real estate. His shirts were now always perfectly ironed, his hair styled with expensive products, and phrases he had clearly picked up from Verity and her parents crept into his speech. Our meetings became rare and strained. Every time I came to their house, Verity found a way to point out my simplicity. "Barton, you always wear such practical shirts," she would say, glancing at my clothes. "It's so refreshing in this day and age when everyone is chasing brands." Or, "Your car must be very reliable if you've been driving it for so many years." Few people appreciate that kind of stability these days. Every compliment was a veiled insult, every conversation a demonstration of her superiority. Noel said nothing. Sometimes I saw a hint of embarrassment in his eyes, but he never stood up for me, never stopped his wife when she crossed the line. Once, when the three of us were having dinner at their house, Verity decided to ask me about my retirement plans. "Barton, you must be thinking about retiring? Many of my friends are already retired at your age." "I love my job, Verity. I see no reason to quit." "Sure, but being a waiter and a chef is such physically demanding work. You need to take care of yourself." I glanced at Noel. He was engrossed in his steak, carefully cutting it into perfect pieces. "I'm fine," I replied curtly. Of course. It's just Noel and I are worried. Right, dear?" Noel looked up, as if he had been suddenly pulled out of a deep sleep. "Huh?" "Yes, Dad. Maybe you should think about slowing down a little. You're not getting any younger." At that moment, I knew I had lost my son. Not physically, he was sitting right in front of me. But my Noel, the boy Elsa and I had raised with love and hope, was gone. In his place was this well-groomed young man, repeating his wife's words as if they were his own. After that dinner, I started visiting them even less often. We talked on the phone sometimes, exchanging formal pleasantries. "How are you, Dad?" "I'm fine, son. How are you?" "Everything's great. A lot of work." Empty words with no real meaning behind them. Verity seemed quite content with the way things were. She politely invited me over for Christmas and Thanksgiving, but I felt she was doing it more out of a sense of duty than a genuine desire to have me at her table. At one of these family dinners, I think it was Thanksgiving, Verity told me about her new project. She was consulting for a chain of high-end restaurants on image issues. You wouldn't believe how many restaurant owners don't understand the basics of presentation and marketing. They think it's enough to just cook well. These days, that's not enough. I nodded politely, swallowing turkey that was dry and undersalted. For example, the restaurant I'm working with now, 3 Michelin stars by the way, their chef is a genius, but he has no idea how to interact with the public. We had to completely rebuild his public image. "Interesting," I said, thinking of the chef at my restaurant in Baltimore, Giuseppe, an Italian with golden hands and a fiery temper who refused to come out to greet guests but cooked so well that people came back again and again to try his dishes. "Yes, it's very interesting work. I help people become better, more successful, or just different," I remarked. Verity gave me a sharp look. but her smile didn't waver. Sometimes people need to change to keep up with the times. Not everyone can afford to stay the same. It was another jab at me, but I was used to them and just smiled in response. After dessert, as we were drinking coffee in the living room, Verity suddenly said, "By the way, Barton, Noel and I were thinking about having a small dinner party in 2 weeks. It's our wedding anniversary. Nothing fancy, just the closest family and friends. My parents will be there, and we wanted to invite you." I was surprised. They usually celebrated such events with their friends, who were as young and ambitious as they were. "Thank you for the invitation. Of course, I'll be there." "Great. We booked a table at the Old Maple. Do you know the place? They say the food is excellent, although a little traditional." I almost choked on my coffee. "The Old Maple is my flagship restaurant in Greenbelt, the one where it all started." "Yes, I've heard of it," I replied, trying to keep a neutral expression on my face. "One of my clients raved about it. She said they have an excellent sirloin steak with blueberry sauce." I smiled. That dish was my pride and joy, a recipe I had perfected over the years. The blueberry sauce was made according to a special recipe with red wine, honey, and spices, known only to me and the restaurant's head chef. "Sounds delicious," I said. "I hope you like it. I know you prefer home cooking, but sometimes it's nice to go out somewhere more decent." I didn't tell her that the Old Maple started out as a small family restaurant where I cooked and Elsa waited tables. I didn't tell her how we had scrimped and saved to buy quality kitchen equipment, how I had personally chosen every chair and table, how I had drawn the first menu myself. All these years, I hadn't thought it necessary to brag about my achievements. And now, looking at Verity's indulgent smile, I saw no point in starting. "I'll be looking forward to it," I said, and it was the honest truth. 2 weeks flew by. I was busy as usual. Running a chain of restaurants required constant attention, especially now that we were preparing to open the 7th Old Maple in Annapolis. I personally checked the menu, talked to suppliers, and supervised the renovations. Work had always been my solace, my way of forgetting about my problems, about the emptiness Elsa had left behind, about my disappointment in my son. The evening before the dinner, I called Jeffrey, the manager of the Old Maple in Greenbelt. "I'll be having dinner with your son's family tomorrow," I told him. "Oh, Mr. Hutch, we'll be delighted to have you. Would you like me to prepare something special?" "No, Jeff, everything should be as usual. They don't know I'm the owner." "Understood, sir. We'll behave ourselves. Just maybe a table by the window, the one that looks out on the garden." "Of course, Mr. Hutch, everything will be done." I didn't sleep a wink that night, thinking about the evening ahead. It wasn't that I was planning some grand scene or revelation. It was just that, for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange excitement, almost anticipation. It was as if something was about to happen, something important. In the morning, I spent a long time choosing what to wear. My wardrobe wasn't very varied, mostly practical shirts, jeans, and a few jackets for business meetings. But this time I took out a suit that I only wore on special occasions. Dark blue with a barely noticeable stripe, bought when Elsa was still alive. She always said I looked younger in it. "Well, Elle, what do you think? Should I make an impression?" I asked the photo of my wife standing on the dresser. She smiled her usual warm smile from the photograph, and I thought she nodded approvingly. I chose the suit, a white shirt, and a muted burgundy tie, Elsa's favorite color. Not too flashy, but elegant enough even by Verity standards. In the afternoon, I stopped by the restaurant to make sure everything was ready for the evening. Jeffrey had already arranged for the best table to be prepared, the one by the window overlooking the small garden I had planted behind the restaurant. In autumn, the garden no longer looked as lush as it did in summer, but it was still pleasing to the eye with the bright colors of the maple trees, after which the restaurant was named. "Everything will be fine, Mr. Hutch," Jeffrey assured me. "We'll prepare the best dinner for you." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. I didn't know what to expect from this evening, but I was ready for anything. Back home, I checked my appearance once more and sprayed a little cologne on my wrists, the same one Elsa had given me on our last wedding anniversary, which I had been saving for special occasions. I glanced at my watch. It was time to leave. On the way to the restaurant, I thought about Noel, about what he was like as a child, curious, playful, with eyes full of wonder at the world. When and how did he turn into this alienated young man who seemed ashamed of his father? Maybe I had put too much pressure on him with my expectations. Or on the contrary, had I not guided him enough, allowing him to drift? Elsa always said that everyone has their own path, and we cannot force others to live by our rules. Let him go, Bart, she would say now. Just love him for who he is. But is it easy to love someone who seems to have rejected everything you taught him? Who allows his wife to mock you without saying a word in your defense? I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes later than planned. It wasn't that I was deliberately late. I just decided to stop by the cemetery first to put flowers on Elsa's grave. Today was a special day, and I wanted her to be with me, at least in my thoughts. The old maple looked festive on this autumn evening. The facade was softly lit, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. Through the large windows, I could see candles flickering on the tables inside, waiters in white shirts and dark vests gliding between the tables. My restaurant, my life's work. I left my car in the parking lot, not in the owner's spot. Today I was just a guest. At the last minute I decided not to wear a suit after all, but to stay in my usual clothes. Dark gray pants and a blue shirt under a cashmere jumper. Not too dressy, but neat and respectable. Elsa always said that blue suited me. Entering the restaurant, I nodded to the hostess, Sarah, who, upon seeing me, widened her eyes slightly but quickly regained her composure. "Good evening, sir. Are you expecting a reservation?" "Yes, a table for Hutch or Prescott," I replied, playing the part of a regular customer. "Of course, sir. Your party is already here. Let me show you to your table." I followed Sarah through the hall, filled with hushed conversations and the clinking of glasses. I knew every corner of this place, every detail of the interior, from the oak paneling on the walls to the wrought iron lamps I had commissioned from a local craftsman. I saw some of the patrons look up as I passed by. Many of them were regulars and recognized me. But today I didn't stop for greetings and small talk as I usually did. I saw them from a distance. Noel, Verity, and her parents were sitting at the best table by the window. Hugh Prescott was talking animatedly, gesturing with his hands. Winifred was smiling indulgently. Verity was scanning the room with the expert eye of someone assessing merchandise. And Noel looked so strange in his expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair. When had he become this smooth young man, so unlike the boy Elsa and I had raised? "Dad," he spotted me first and stood up to greet me. We were starting to worry. "Sorry I'm late." I shook his hand and nodded to the others. A few things came up. Verity looked me up and down, lingering on my sweater, which was clearly not new, though it was of good quality. The corners of her lips twitched in a barely perceptible smile. "Barton, we're so glad you could join us," she said in a tone that didn't match her words at all. "I hope you like it here. It's not the home cooking you're used to, but I'm told it's quite decent." "I'm sure it'll be fine," I replied, sitting down in the empty chair between Noel and Hugh. "Barton, long time no see." Hugh slapped me on the shoulder with exaggerated familiarity. "How have you been? Still working at that little restaurant?" "Yes, still in the restaurant business," I smiled, not correcting his deliberately derogatory little restaurant. "Commendable, commendable," he nodded. These days, few people stay loyal to their work for so long. Although, of course, you could take some time off when you retire. "I'm not retired, Hugh, and I don't plan to be anytime soon." Of course, of course. A man should work as long as he can. And when he can't anymore, well, there's always family to fall back on. He looked meaningfully at Noel, and I understood what he was saying. In their minds, I was an aging father who would soon become a burden to his successful son. I should have laughed, but I held back. The waiter approached. Michael, one of our best employees, who had been working at the Old Maple for 8 years. I saw him hesitate for a moment when he saw me as a customer, but he quickly regained his composure. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael, and I will be your server tonight. Would you like an aperitif before dinner?" Verity, of course, took the initiative. "We'll have champagne. Do you have Dom Perignon?" "Of course, ma'am. Which vintage would you prefer?" 2010, if you have it." "Certainly." When Michael had left, Verity turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you don't mind champagne, Barton. After all, we're celebrating. 2 years of marriage is worth marking." "Of course," I nodded. "Congratulations to you both." Winifred, who had been silent until now, leaned across the table toward me. "Barton, I must say, This place is much better than I expected. Such a cozy atmosphere, almost like a country club, only more accessible. Yes, it's nice here, I agreed, enjoying the irony of the situation. A good place for special occasions. Oh, we usually prefer more sophisticated restaurants, Verity interjected. But my friend raved about this place, so I decided to give it a try. Although I must admit, I'm a little concerned that they still use cotton tablecloths instead of linen. Decent establishments only use linen these days. I suppressed a smile. The tablecloths at the Old Maple were made of the highest quality Egyptian cotton, specially ordered from a supplier I had been working with for 15 years. But Verity, of course, was above such details. Michael returned with champagne and a basket of freshly baked bread. He deftly opened the bottle, filled our glasses, and left, promising to return in a few minutes to take our order. Hugh raised his glass. To Noel and Verity, to their love and success. We clinked glasses, and I noticed Verity cast an appraising glance at my sweater as I raised my arm. Her disdain was almost palpable. Barton, she began after her first sip, I've been meaning to ask you. Your sweater? Is that a vintage style? Nowadays, you know, a lot of young people wear old clothes on purpose. It's considered trendy. No, Verity, it's just a comfortable sweater, I replied calmly. I don't really follow trends. Yes, that's obvious, she smiled as if she had paid me a compliment. At your age, it must be difficult to keep up with fashion. And why bother, really? When you work in a restaurant, appearance isn't that important. Appearance is always important, dear, Winifred interjected. It's just that everyone has different opportunities. Barton must spend his money on more practical things than clothes. That's admirable. They were talking about me as if I weren't at the table. I noticed Noel shifting uncomfortably in his chair, clearly feeling awkward but saying nothing in my defense. Michael returned to take our dinner order. Verity naturally took on the role of expert, asking detailed questions about each dish and commenting on how it should be prepared in really good restaurants. When it was my turn, I simply said, sirloin steak with blueberry sauce, medium rare. Excellent choice, sir. Michael nodded with a slight smile. When he walked away, Verity turned to me. You know, Barton, blueberry sauce is a rather difficult combination with steak. Beef is usually served with pepper or mushroom sauce, but of course, everyone has their own taste. I have a special relationship with blueberry sauce, I replied, and it was the absolute truth. Elsa and I had developed the recipe together, spending long evenings experimenting in our small kitchen. A special relationship with sauce? Verity laughed, and her parents joined her. How funny you are, Barton. Always so unique. Dinner continued in the same vein. Verity and her parents discussed their travels, their high society acquaintances, and the latest trends in interior design. Noel occasionally chimed in, trying to show that he too belonged to this world. I mostly kept quiet, watching the spectacle and thinking about what Elsa would have said if she were here. When our dishes were served, Verity didn't miss the opportunity to make another remark. Oh, your steak looks interesting, Barton. That's a big portion. Enough for two, isn't it? But I suppose when you're doing physical work, you need more calories. Verity, Noel finally spoke up. Would you mind? Mind what, dear? She smiled innocently. I'm just concerned about your father's health. At his age, he needs to watch what he eats. I calmly cut into my steak. It was cooked to perfection, just as I had expected. The blueberry sauce, glossy and fragrant, complemented the flavor of the meat just as it should. You know, Barton, Verity continued after a few minutes of silence, I've always admired people who devote their entire lives to one thing. It's such stability. Although, of course, in today's world it's important to develop and move forward. But not everyone can afford to do that. Afford? I asked, looking up from my plate. Yes, education, new skills, all of that costs money. And time, of course. But mostly money, which many people simply don't have. Verity, please. Noel tried to intervene again, but she ignored him. No, it's fine, she said, placing her hand on his wrist. Your father understands what I mean. Right, Barton? You never had the opportunity, well, to move up. But there's no shame in that. Someone has to do that kind of work. Hugh grunted in agreement, and Winifred gave me a condescending smile. Waiters are the backbone of the restaurant business, she added, as if to compliment me. Without them, even the best chefs wouldn't be able to bring their art to the public. I took a sip of wine, feeling not anger but a strange amusement growing inside me. The situation was so absurd that I could barely contain my laughter. You're right, Winifred, I said finally. Every person in a restaurant is important, from the dishwasher to the owner. Oh, the owners, Verity dismissed. They're usually just investors who never even show up. The real work falls on the shoulders of the staff. People like you, Barton. At that moment, Michael approached our table with a bottle of wine. Excuse me for interrupting, he said, addressing me. Mr. Hutch, Jeffrey asked if you would be at the meeting with the new supplier tomorrow. He tried to call you, but you didn't answer. There was a moment of silence. Verity froze with her fork in midair. Hugh frowned and Winifred blinked in confusion, looking from me to the waiter and back. Yes, Michael, I will, I replied calmly. Tell Jeffrey I'll be there by 9. All right, sir. And the chef asks if you enjoyed your steak. He used a new method of aging the meat that you mentioned last week. Tell him the steak was excellent. The aging had exactly the effect we were hoping for. Very well, sir. Enjoy your meal. Michael left, and a heavy silence fell over the table. I continued to eat calmly, feeling the astonished glances of everyone present. Dad, Noel finally said, his voice sounding strangely high. You know the staff at this restaurant? I put down my fork and knife, dabbed my lips with a napkin, and looked at my son. Yes, Noel, I know the staff quite well considering that I own this restaurant, and 6 more just like it in different cities. Verity made a strange sound, something between a cough and a wheeze. Her perfectly made-up face turned ashen. You own it? Noel repeated, as if he didn't understand the meaning of the word. Yes, son. The Old Maple is a chain of restaurants I founded 32 years ago. We started out with a small place with 5 tables, and now we have 7 restaurants in different cities, 3 stars in the Michelin Guide, and several $1 million in revenue annually. And next month, we're opening our 8th restaurant in New York. Hugh Prescott coughed, choking on his wine. Winifred patted him busily on the back, but kept her astonished eyes on me. But you never said, Noel muttered. You never asked, I replied simply. You always knew I worked in the restaurant business, but you weren't interested in the details. Even when you were little and I took you into the kitchen, you always wanted to leave. And then you found your own path, and I respected your choice. Verity finally found her voice. You've been pretending a poor retiree all this time? I looked her straight in the eyes. I never pretended, Verity. I just didn't see the need to brag about my accomplishments. My father always said, let your actions speak for you, not your wallet. I live modestly, not because I can't afford more, but because it's comfortable for me. And I never judge people by how much money they spend on clothes or what kind of watch they wear. Hugh Prescott cleared his throat and suddenly burst into unnatural laughter. Barton, old man, what a surprise. Who would have thought? Why did you keep quiet all this time? We could have discussed investments, the real estate market. Because to you, Hugh, a man who works in a restaurant wasn't worth a serious conversation, I replied calmly. Only now, when you found out that I'm the owner and not a waiter, are you suddenly interested in my opinion. But I'm the same person I was 5 minutes ago. Winifred nervously adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. Barton, dear, you've misunderstood us. We've always held you in the highest regard. It's just that you've been so modest, so reluctant to talk about your achievements. You called me a pauper at this very table. I turned to Verity. Not 10 minutes ago, you implied that I couldn't afford decent clothes or an education. You looked down on me from the day we met, even though you knew nothing about me. Verity paled even more, her lips trembling. I never called you. You did, Verity, Noel interrupted unexpectedly, his voice sounding tired. You did it all the time, and I let you, even though I knew. Deep down, I always knew that my father didn't just work in a restaurant. I grew up watching him run this place, making decisions, seeing how the staff treated him with respect. But it was convenient to forget that. It was convenient to let you think he was just an old man working as a waiter or a cook, because it made me feel better, more successful. Verity turned to him, her face contorted with rage. You knew? You knew all this time and you didn't say anything? I didn't know for sure. Noel shook his head. I just suspected. But I never asked, because it was easier for me to live in a world where I was the successful son-in-law of Hugh Prescott, not the son of Barton Hutch, who turned his back on the family business. I looked at my son and for the first time in a long time, saw a glimpse of the boy Elsa and I had raised. A boy who wasn't afraid to tell the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. Well, I said, finishing my wine, the masks are off. Now you know who I am, and I finally see who you are. I looked at Verity. You know what's always amazed me? How people who consider themselves elite are often so much more petty and superficial than those they despise. You look at a person and you see their clothes, their car, their address. You don't see their character, their soul, their values. Verity opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand to stop her. You thought you humiliated me with your mockery, but in reality, you only humiliated yourselves. Because real wealth isn't a bank account or designer clothes. It's the ability to see value in people regardless of their status. That's what my parents taught me, and that's what I tried to teach Noel. It's a shame the lesson wasn't learned. I stood up from the table, placing my napkin next to my plate. The restaurant is on the house. Good night. I left the restaurant on a cool autumn evening, breathing in the fresh air deeply. The moon hung over the city, surrounded by a scattering of stars, and for a moment it seemed to me that Elsa was looking down at me from above. Would you approve? I asked her silently, and I thought I heard her quiet laugh. It's about time, Bart. It's about time. The restaurant door slammed behind me and I turned around. Noel ran out after me, his face pale, his tie askew. Dad, wait! I stopped at my car and watched him hurry toward me. At that moment, he looked so young, almost like the boy who once asked me to check if there were monsters under his bed. I don't know what to say, he breathed, stopping in front of me. Then maybe it's better to say nothing, I replied calmly. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. No, I have to. Dad, I'm sorry, I acted like a man who is ashamed of his father, I finished for him. Like a man who allows his wife to mock the person who gave him life? He lowered his eyes and I saw his shoulders slump. Yes, that's exactly how I acted. I don't know how it happened, how I became this. I looked at my son, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and pity. He really didn't understand how he had gradually become who he was. It happens little by little, day after day, I said quietly. Every time you choose the easy way instead of the right way. Every time you stay silent when you should speak up. Every time you let others define who you are. What should I do, Dad? His voice sounded almost childishly confused. That's up to you, Noel. I can't tell you how to live your life. I tried to do that when you were younger, and look where that got us. Here we are, outside a restaurant, trying to figure out how it all went wrong. The restaurant door opened again, and Verity and her parents stepped outside. They stopped on the sidewalk when they saw us, and the tension hung heavy in the air. Verity looked furious, her usually flawless makeup smudged as if she had been crying or rubbing her eyes. Hugh and Winifred stood slightly behind her, their faces a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Noel! Verity's voice rang with tension. We're leaving, right now. My son turned to her but didn't move. Verity, wait, I'm talking to my father. What is there to talk about? She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the asphalt like miniature hammers. About how he's been lying to us all this time? Made us think he was some poor old man when in reality, I never lied to anyone, I interrupted her. I always told you the truth about what I do. If you chose to draw your own conclusions based on your prejudices, that's not my fault. Prejudices? Her eyes widened in indignation. You wear cheap clothes, live in an ordinary house, drive an old car. Of course you thought that a person is defined by what they wear and where they live. I finished for her. And that's the problem, Verity. You only see the surface, only the outside. Hugh Prescott cleared his throat and stepped forward, putting on his most charming smile. Barton, listen. There's clearly been a misunderstanding here. No one meant to offend you. Verity can be blunt at times, but she's a good person. We're all family here, and I'm sure we can work this misunderstanding out like adults. I looked at him, trying to figure out if he really believed what he was saying or if this was just another attempt at manipulation. Misunderstanding, Hugh? Your daughter called me a beggar. That's a misunderstanding? Well, she was emotional. You know, young people say things without thinking these days. Dad, Verity protested, but Hugh gestured for her to be quiet. Barton, let's start over. Now that we know about your successful business, I think we have something to talk about. Perhaps over a glass of fine brandy? I have an excellent Remy Martin XO at home. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so predictable, so transparent, it was almost comical. Hugh, you never cease to amaze me. Half an hour ago, you were looking down on me as if I were unworthy of your attention. And now, having learned about my financial situation, you suddenly want to be best friends. Don't you find that a little hypocritical? Hugh's face reddened, but he quickly regained his composure. That's not fair, Barton. I've always treated you with respect. It's just that we're from different worlds, and you thought I was lower than you on the social ladder, I finished for him, and therefore not worthy of real respect. Winifred, who had been silent until now, took a step forward, her pearl necklace glistening dimly in the light of the street lamps. Barton, please don't be so harsh. We all make mistakes. No one is perfect. Hugh and I would love to get to know you better, learn about your business. Maybe we could even help you with some connections in high society. High society? I shook my head. Winifred, I know the governor of the state, 3 senators, and some of the biggest businessmen in the country. They all eat at my restaurants. Some of them are my friends. I don't need your connections. She looked as if I had slapped her. Hugh put his hand on her shoulder, his face hardening. All right, Barton. I see you're not interested in reconciliation. That's your right. But think about Noel and Verity. They're young. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Don't destroy their family because of your pride. Verity, who until that moment had been glaring at me furiously, suddenly changed tactics. Her face softened, her eyes filled with tears. Barton, she said, taking a step toward me, I need to apologize. I was wrong. I said some terrible things and I have no excuse. But I was blinded by my prejudices, my upbringing. Now I see what an amazing person you are. Building a business from scratch, achieving such success. It's inspiring. I looked at her, trying to see a shred of sincerity in her words, but all I saw was calculation. She was already figuring out how to turn the situation to her advantage, how to use my newfound wealth. Verity, I said calmly, you don't admire me. You admire my money, and that's a big difference. Her face twisted with anger for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. No, you're wrong. I admire your strength, your modesty, your Verity. I raised my hand, stopping the flow of flattery. Let's not do this. We both know it's not true. You despised me when you thought I was poor. Now that you know I'm not, you're trying to change your attitude. But I'm still the same person, and if you couldn't respect me then, I don't believe you truly respect me now. Noel, who had been silently shifting his gaze between me and his wife, finally spoke up. Verity, enough. Dad's right. You despised him. We both know that. She turned sharply toward him, her eyes narrowing. Whose side are you on, Noel? Is he more important to you than me? Than our family? It's not about sides, Verity. It's about the truth. We were wrong. Both of us. I let you say terrible things about my father, and I often thought, no better. I'm ashamed of that. Verity's face contorted with rage. How dare you, after everything my family has done for you? What would you be without us? Without my father's connections? Just another loser, jumping from job to job. Noel flinched as if he had been struck, but he didn't back down. Maybe, but at least I would have been honest with myself. Hugh stepped forward, his face anxious. Okay, let's all calm down. We're all tired and upset. Let's go home, get some sleep, and discuss everything tomorrow with a clear head. I'm sure we can find a solution that will work for everyone. I looked at him, at his wife, at Verity, at my son, and suddenly felt deeply exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. It was as if the burden I had been carrying all these years had suddenly become unbearably heavy. Hugh, There is no solution that will satisfy everyone, I said quietly, because we want different things. You want to use my money and connections. Verity wants to control Noel and, through him, access to my fortune. And I just want to be myself, without pretense or manipulation. That's not fair, Barton, Hugh began, but I shook my head. It's perfectly fair, and you know it. But you know what? I'm grateful for tonight. It's helped me see the truth that I may have ignored for too long. I turned to Noel, who stood with his shoulders slumped, lost between two worlds. Son, you need to decide who you are and what you want out of life. Not what Verity wants, or I want, or anyone else wants. What you want. And when you decide, I'll be here. Whatever choice you make. I got into the car and started the engine. Through the window, I could see Verity saying something fiercely to Noel, Hugh, and Winifred standing nearby, their faces a mixture of confusion and calculation. And I saw my son, a lonely figure between them, a man at a crossroads. I pulled out of the parking lot feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I had been completely honest, with them and with myself. And whatever the consequences, I was ready to accept them. I spent the next morning in my office above the restaurant, reviewing reports and preparing for a meeting with a new supplier. Work had always been my refuge, a place where I felt confident and calm. But today my thoughts kept returning to the events of the previous evening, to Noel's expression as he stood in the parking lot, torn between loyalty to his father and fear of losing his wife's affection. Around 11 o'clock, there was a knock at my office door. Come in, I said, expecting to see Jeffrey or one of the staff. But standing in the doorway was Hugh Prescott, impeccably dressed with a briefcase in his hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Barton, good morning. I hope I'm not disturbing you? I leaned back in my chair, surprised but not shocked by his appearance. Hugh, to what do I owe the pleasure of such an early visit? He entered the office, looking around with ill-concealed curiosity. My office was simple and functional. A desk, a few chairs, bookshelves filled with cookbooks and business literature, and a few photographs on the walls. I thought we should talk in private, man to man, without emotional women and children. Have a seat, I said, pointing to the chair across from me. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. I won't be long. He sat down, placing his briefcase on his knees, and was silent for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Barton, I came to apologize for yesterday. The situation got out of hand, and I regret it. Do you regret the situation or the way you behaved? I asked bluntly. He frowned slightly but quickly regained his impeccable smile. Both, of course. I shouldn't have judged you by your appearance. That was wrong. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Hugh Prescott wasn't the kind of man who came just to apologize. And I thought, he continued, opening his briefcase, that maybe we could, fix this situation, get back on track. He took out a folder of documents and placed it on the table in front of me. What's this? I asked, not touching the folder. A business proposal. You see, Barton, I've been thinking about diversifying my investments for some time. Real estate is all well and good, but the restaurant business, especially one as successful as yours, is an interesting opportunity. I looked at him, not believing my ears. After everything that had happened yesterday, he came here with a business proposal. You want to invest in my restaurants? I clarified. Not exactly, he smiled even wider. I'm thinking of a more comprehensive collaboration, a partnership, if you will. My company could acquire a controlling stake in your chain, and you would remain as managing director. We would provide capital for expansion, take the brand national. Imagine, Old Maple in every major city in America. I slowly opened the folder. Inside was a contract, several pages of figures, graphs, and forecasts. I glanced through the documents, noting the key points. You're offering me to sell a controlling stake in my company for this amount? I pointed to the figure in the contract. Yes, and I consider it a very generous offer. Given the current market situation and your annual turnover, the multiplier is more than fair. I closed the folder and looked at Hugh Prescott. He sat with his back straight, with the confident and slightly condescending expression of a man accustomed to getting what he wants. Hugh, let me ask you a question, I said calmly. Why do you think I would agree to sell my life's work to a man who yesterday looked at me like I was dirt beneath his feet? His smile faltered but did not disappear. Barton, I've already apologized for that misunderstanding, and I came here with a business proposal that has nothing to do with our personal relationship. This is purely business. There's nothing pure about business, Hugh. Business is built on trust, on relationships, on honesty, and I don't see any of that in you. He tensed, his eyes turning cold. That's a very emotional approach to business, Barton. No wonder your chain is still limited to a few restaurants, even though the potential is much greater. Maybe, I shrugged, but these are my restaurants, my vision. My soul is in every dish, in every detail of the interior. And I'm not going to sell that for any amount of money, especially not to you. Hugh pressed his lips into a thin line, his feigned friendliness gone. You're making a mistake, Barton. Business doesn't tolerate sentimentality. Sooner or later, you'll have to learn that. Perhaps, but it will be my mistake, not yours. He stood up, nodded curtly, and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold. Think about it, Barton. Offers like this don't come around twice. After he left, I sat for a long time, staring at the closed door. Then I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. Mark? It's Barton Hutch. We need to meet. Today, if possible. I want to make some changes to my will. The rest of the day was spent taking care of things related to the restaurant. I checked the kitchen, talked to suppliers, and met with the chef to discuss seasonal changes to the menu. Work was always the best cure for all problems. Around 6 in the evening, just as I was about to leave, there was another knock on my office door. Come in, I said, expecting to see Jeffrey with the latest reports. But standing in the doorway was Verity, impeccably dressed, with perfect makeup, but with a hint of uncertainty in her eyes that I had never seen before. Barton, may I come in? She asked, her voice not as confident as usual. Of course. I nodded to the chair where her father had been sitting a few hours earlier. Have a seat. She entered, sat down cautiously, placing her designer handbag on her lap. She was silent for a moment, as if unsure of how to begin. Noel doesn't know I'm here, she said finally. He's very upset after yesterday. We're both upset. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. Barton, I came here to try to fix things. I know I behaved inappropriately. I said some terrible things, and I sincerely regret it. I looked at her closely, trying to see the real Verity behind the perfect mask. Was she being sincere? Or was this just another mask, another role? Verity, why are you really here? She asked bluntly. What do you want? She sighed, and for a moment I thought I saw the real woman behind the facade. I want everything to be okay. I don't want Noel to be torn between us. I want us to be a family. A family? I raised an eyebrow. You never saw me as family, Verity. To you, I was always an obstacle, an inconvenient appendage to Noel. She lowered her eyes. I know, and I was wrong. I placed too much importance on external things. Money, status. I thought that's what made a person significant. And now you think differently? She looked up and I could see the struggle in her eyes, between pride and the need to accept, between her true feelings and what she had to say to get what she wanted. I'm learning to see things differently, she said cautiously, and I'd like you to give me a chance to prove it, a chance to be better. I looked at her for a long time, trying to decide what to believe. Part of me wanted to believe in her sincerity, in the possibility of change. Another, more cynical part saw it as just another attempt at manipulation. Verity, I'll give you a chance. Not for your sake, but for Noel's. But remember, words are meaningless without action. I'll judge you not by what you say, but by what you do. She nodded, her face showing relief. Thank you, Barton. I won't let you down. We could start with a family dinner. This weekend, at our place. Just the three of us, without my parents. Okay, I agreed, even though a voice inside me warned me that this might be a trap. I'll be there. When she left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking down at the street below. People hurried about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding around them. I thought about Noel, about Verity, about Hugh and Winifred Prescott, about how money and status can distort human relationships, turn love into a transaction, and family into a business partnership. And I thought about the decision I had made today in my lawyer's office, a decision that would change the future of my family and my business forever. The office of Mark Livingston, my lawyer and old friend, was quiet and cool. Outside, a light autumn rain was falling, the drops running down the glass and creating intricate patterns. Mark sat across from me, reviewing the documents I had just signed, his face focused and slightly concerned. "Are you sure, Bart?" he asked, looking up from the papers. "These are serious changes. Noel is your only son, your flesh and blood." I looked at my signature, smooth and clear, which had just changed the course of my life and the lives of my family. "I'm sure, Mark. Blood isn't the only thing that binds people together. Sometimes it's not even the most important thing." Mark sighed, gathering the documents into a neat stack. "I've known your boy since he was a child. I remember him running around your first restaurant while you were in the kitchen. Is it really that bad?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. "It's not that it's bad, Mark. It's just that Noel has made his choice. He has chosen the world of the Prescotts, a world of ostentatious luxury, social status, and empty values. And I have to respect his choice, even if I don't agree with it. And now what? The foundation you're setting up. That's a big responsibility." "I know, but it's the right thing to do. Money should be put to work, helping those who really need it. Young people who, like me once, dream of starting their own business, but have neither the means nor the connections." Mark nodded, putting the documents away in a folder. "Your wife would be proud of you, Bart." I smiled, remembering Elsa, her eyes, her smile, her ability to see the best in people. "I hope so, Mark. I really do." On my way home, I stopped by the cemetery. The rain had stopped, and the air was fresh, filled with the smell of wet earth and fallen leaves. I walked down the familiar path to Elsa's grave, holding a bouquet of her favorite wildflowers. "Hi, El," I said quietly, placing the flowers on the gravestone. "I did it. I changed the will. Now the bulk of our estate will go to a fund to help young entrepreneurs. I think you would have liked that." I stood there for a while, letting the memories flow through me. Our first meeting, our wedding, Noel's birth, the opening of our first restaurant, all the joys and sorrows we shared. I miss you, El, every day. But today I feel like you're somewhere close by, watching over me. The wind brushed my face like the gentle touch of a loved one's hand, and for a moment I felt her presence as clearly as if she were standing right there. Saturday evening came too quickly. I stood in front of Noel and Verity's house, gathering my courage before ringing the doorbell. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, to avoid what was sure to be an unpleasant conversation. But I had never been a man who ran away from challenges. Noel opened the door, his face a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Dad, you came," he said, as if he wasn't sure I would actually show up. "I promised," I replied simply. He stepped aside to let me in. Inside, everything was immaculate as always. Perfectly arranged designer furniture, works of art on the walls, not a speck of dust, not a single item out of place. The house was like something out of a magazine, but not a place to live. Verity emerged from the kitchen wearing a simple but elegant dress, with a smile that seemed almost genuine. "Barton, we're so glad you came," she said, coming closer. "I made dinner myself. Nothing fancy, just home cooking." I struggled to hide my surprise. Verity cooking a home-cooked meal? This was something new. "That sounds wonderful," I replied politely. We walked into the dining room, where the table was set for three. No frills, no ostentatious details, just a normal family setting. I noticed that even the wine glasses were not the crystal works of art they usually used, but simple yet elegant flutes. "Sit down, Dad," Noel said, pointing to the head of the table. "I'll open the wine." Verity returned with a dish of roast beef, which to her credit looked delicious. The smell of beef stewed with vegetables and herbs filled the room. "I hope you like it, Barton. I found the recipe online. I was looking for something authentic, not one of those trendy diet dishes that don't fill you up." I nodded, noting her attempt to please me, to show that she was changing. Noel poured the wine, Inexpensive but good, a red that went perfectly with the stew. To the family, he said, raising his glass. To a new beginning. We drank and ate in silence for a while, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. The roast was not bad, maybe not as good as Elsa would have made it, but quite edible. Barton, Verity finally spoke, I want to apologize again for everything that happened, for everything I said and did. It was unworthy. I looked at her, trying to see real emotion behind the perfect makeup and rehearsed words. Verity, I accept your apology. But as I said, words mean little without actions. I understand, she nodded, and I'm ready to prove that I really want to change, to be better, to be a real family. Noel placed his hand on hers in a gesture of support. We both want this, Dad, to start with a clean slate, to forget the past. I slowly sipped my wine, thinking about how easy it was for them to talk about forgetting the past, as if all the times Verity had humiliated me and Noel had remained silent could simply be deleted like unnecessary files from a computer. You know, I said, setting my glass on the table, you can't forget the past. It shapes us, makes us who we are. But you can learn from it and move on. Exactly, Verity agreed too quickly. Move on, together. As a family. I noticed her glance dart to Noel for a moment, as if seeking confirmation that she was saying the right thing. Dad, Noel leaned forward. Verity and I have talked a lot these past few days. About us, about you, about the future, and we realized that we were too fixated on appearances, on status, on what other people think. Yes, that's true, Verity chimed in. We weren't living our own lives, we were living for show. And it was empty. I listened closely, noting how synchronized their words were, how well rehearsed their remorse sounded. It was almost like a play stage, especially for me. And what made you reconsider your views? I asked calmly. They exchanged quick glances and Noel replied, The truth, Dad. What happened at the restaurant opened our eyes. We saw how petty and superficial we were. And we want to change, added Verity, to become better people, to create a real family based on love and respect, not on appearances. I nodded, taking another sip of wine. That's a commendable aspiration. And how do you plan to achieve it? Again, there was a quick exchange of glances, as if checking who should speak next. We were thinking, Noel began cautiously, that maybe I could join your business, learn everything from the beginning, understand how you built such a successful restaurant chain. Yes, Verity chimed in. Noel has always admired what you've built, and now that we know the whole picture, that admiration has only grown. I looked at them, and suddenly it all became crystal clear. They hadn't changed. They had simply changed tactics. Upon learning of my condition, they decided that the way to get to me was through reconciliation and family values. You know, I said, putting down my fork, there's an expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can say the right words and make the right gestures, but inside you're still the same people. Their faces tensed, their smiles became strained. Dad, you don't believe that people can change? Noel asked, a hint of hurt in his voice. I do, but real change takes time and a sincere desire, not financial motivation. Verity frowned, her perfect mask beginning to crack. Barton, that's not fair. We really want to change our relationship, to become a real family. A real family? I shook my head. A real family supports each other always, not just when they find out about hidden wealth. A real family doesn't laugh at their poor father at the dinner table. Noel looked genuinely upset, but I couldn't tell if it was because of my words or because their plan hadn't worked. Dad, please, give us a chance. I sighed, feeling not anger, but exhaustion and disappointment. Noel, I've already given you a chance. I came here today hoping to see genuine remorse, a real desire to change your values. Instead, I see a well-planned performance designed to get access to my money. Verity stood up abruptly, her face contorted with anger. How dare you, after everything I've done? I cooked for you, for everything we have. I, Verity Prescott Hutch, stood at the stove like some kind of housewife, and there she was, the real Verity, peeking through the cracks in her perfect mask. Arrogant, selfish, considering cooking for her family degrading? Verity, please. Noel tried to calm her down, but she pushed him away. No, Noel, I've put up with enough. Your father looks down on us as if we're some kind of beggars, as if we're not worthy of his royal presence. I calmly folded my napkin and placed it next to my plate. Verity, you're not beggars. You're just people who judge others by what they can get from them. And I don't want to be part of that world. I stood up from the table looking at my son, who sat with his head down, unable to meet my gaze. Noel, I've changed my will. Most of my fortune will go to a fund to help young entrepreneurs from low-income families. You'll have enough to live comfortably, but not luxuriously. The rest you'll have to earn yourself. He looked up, his eyes filled with surprise and something else. Maybe relief? You're disinheriting me? No, son. I'm giving you the chance to become a man, not just an heir. A man who values who he is, not what he has. Verity laughed, but it was a cold, bitter laugh. How noble! How selfless! An old man who made millions decided to play Robin Hood. I looked at her, feeling not anger, but pity. You know, Verity, someday you'll realize that money isn't the most important thing in life. But I'm afraid that realization will come too late. I turned toward the door, but Noel jumped up and grabbed my arm. Dad, wait. Don't leave like this. We can fix everything, make everything right. I looked at his face, so similar to Elsa's, and felt a sharp pain in my heart. My boy, my only son, somehow lost on the path to adulthood. Noel, my door is always open to you, but not as the heir to my money, but as my son. When you're ready, I'll be waiting. I gently released his hand and left the house, feeling strangely light. It was as if a weight I had been carrying for many years had finally fallen from my shoulders. 6 months passed, winter gave way to spring, and the city blossomed with bright colors. I sat at my desk in my office above the restaurant, reviewing applications from young people seeking grants from my new foundation. The Elsa Foundation, named in honor of my wife, who always believed in helping others, has already helped 5 aspiring entrepreneurs start their own businesses. 2 of them worked in the restaurant business, one opened a bakery, another a small coffee shop, and the 5th a workshop for handmade furniture. I didn't just give them money, I shared my experience, advice, and connections. And seeing their eyes light up with the possibilities that suddenly opened up before them was the best reward. I haven't heard from Noel since that evening. I sometimes saw him and Verity at charity events or new restaurant openings, always impeccably dressed, always with perfect smiles. But those smiles didn't reach their eyes, and I often wondered if they were truly happy in their world of glitz and glamour. Hugh Prescott tried to contact me several more times, each time with a new, lucrative offer. I declined politely but firmly. My restaurants weren't just a business. They were my life's work, my legacy, and I had no intention of turning them into another faceless corporate chain. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I said, expecting to see Jeffrey or one of the staff. But standing in the doorway was Noel. He wasn't wearing his usual expensive suit, but simple jeans and a shirt. And there was something different in his eyes, a new determination I hadn't seen before. Dad, he said quietly, can I come in? I nodded, pointing to the chair opposite him. He sat down, rubbing his hands nervously, a habit he'd had since childhood when he was nervous. How are you? I asked, not knowing where to start. I'm okay. Well, no, I'm not okay, but I'm working on it. I waited, giving him time to collect his thoughts. Verity and I broke up, he said finally, 3 weeks ago. We're not officially divorced yet, but I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything that had happened, Noel was my son, and I didn't want him to be in pain. He shook his head. Don't be. It was inevitable. After that night, something broke between us. Or maybe it was already broken, and I just finally saw it. He paused, looking out the window at the street below. I've thought a lot about what you said, about money not being the most important thing, about being a person, not just an heir. And I realized that I've spent my whole life running away from myself, trying to be someone else. I listened without interrupting, seeing in his eyes a sincerity I hadn't seen in a long time. I didn't come to ask you to change your will, he continued, or to give me a job at the restaurant. I just wanted to say that you were right and that I want to find my own way on my own. I felt warmth spreading through my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction at being right, but simple fatherly pride. I'm glad to hear that, son. What are you planning to do? He shrugged, smiling a little uncertainly. I haven't decided yet. I got a job at a small marketing firm. Nothing special, just an entry-level position, but it's honest. It's mine. Not my father-in-law's connections, not your money, just me and my skills. I nodded, unable to hide my smile. That's a good start. And also, he straightened up as if gathering his courage, I'd like, if you don't mind, to come over sometimes. Just to talk, to get to know you better. To learn about Mom's story, the history of the restaurants, all the things I neglected for so many years. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. My door is always open to you, Noel. Always. He smiled, and in his smile I saw a glimpse of Elsa, her warmth, her ability to see the good in people. Thank you, Dad. That evening, after the restaurant closed, I sat at a table by the window, watching the garden begin to wake up after winter. The first flowers were peeking through the ground, promising a riot of colors soon. Jeffrey approached with a bottle of my favorite whiskey and 2 glasses. Will you join me, Mr. Hutch? I nodded, and he sat down opposite me, pouring the amber liquid into the glasses. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking glasses with him. We sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the moment of peace after a long day of work. Through the large windows of the restaurant, I could see the street outside, with people rushing by, each with their own story, their own joys and sorrows. You know, Mr. Hutch, Jeffrey said after a pause, when I first started working here, I thought it would be temporary. I figured I'd stay for a year or two and then move on. But here I am, 15 years later. I smiled, remembering the young, insecure guy Jeffrey was when he first came to the Old Maple. Time flies. Yeah, he nodded. And you know what's amazing? I've never regretted it. Not a single day. Because this place is home. It's not just a job. It's a place where you matter. I looked at him with gratitude. Jeffrey was one of the people who helped me build the Old Maple, putting not only his time, but also his heart into it. Thank you, Jeff. It means a lot to me. He finished his whiskey and stood up, ready to leave. See you tomorrow, Mr. Hutch. Don't stay up too late. When he left, I was alone in the quiet, dark restaurant. I thought about Noel, about his new venture, about how maybe all was not lost. I thought about the young people my foundation was helping, about their enthusiasm and gratitude. I thought about Jeffrey and the other staff members who had become my second family. And I thought about Elsa, about what she would say now if she could see how my life was turning out. I could almost hear her voice. See, Bart? Everything's working out. It just took time. I raised my glass as if in a toast. Here's to you, Elle, for everything you taught me. Finishing my whiskey, I stood up and slowly walked around the restaurant, running my hand along the backs of the chairs and the smooth surface of the bar. These walls held a piece of my soul, my memories, my life, and here was my future. Not the one I had once imagined, with a son carrying on the family business, but a future full of meaning and purpose nonetheless. Turning off the lights, I stepped outside and breathed in the fresh spring air. The stars shone brightly in the night sky, and I felt Elsa's presence again, as if she were walking beside me, invisible but tangible. A new page, I whispered, looking up at the stars. A new page in the book of life. And somewhere deep down, I knew that this page would be no less interesting than all the previous ones. Because life went on, with its joys and sorrows, ups and downs. And I was ready to face whatever it had in store for me with an open heart and a clear mind.